2 years ago, a pink-haired whistleblower called Christopher Wiley blew the lid off the Cambridge Analytica scandal, which upended the US 2016 election. The revelations told us how the company harvested personal data from as many as 50 million Facebook users to help the Trump campaign. They had in their custody all the arsenal they needed to launch a culture war, which they did. Just to be clear, Cambridge Analytica did not invent the dark arts of data harvesting for political gain, but they did get hold of the data in very deceptive ways. Now, with barely 15 days to go before the US elections, if you run into a data scientist from Carnegie Mellon who works on privacy and human AI cooperation, what would you ask her? That's exactly where we're going to start this chat with Megha Arora, who works with Palantir Technologies, and which is named after the mystical all-seeing stones from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Megha always begins with a disclaimer, so I'll toss it over to her. Welcome, Megha.
Thank you, Nikhila. I want to start with a small disclaimer that views are mine and not my employer's, and I'm thrilled to be here today and look forward to answering your questions.
Megha, data scientists like you are usually part of a larger engineering team, right? Whose job it is to collect lots and lots of data, including personal and proprietary info, and then draw insights from it. There's tremendous amount of editorial power that goes into both those pieces. How do you decide what data to collect? Because that process, when it's distilled into its final form, that's how it seeps into the world and decides its impact, right?
So, data science, machine learning, predictive analytics, pick your favorite word. It is not just solving problems like who should a bank give out loans to, or at what interest rate, who gets a bail or who does not, who's hired for a job position, etc. Data science has gone beyond that because it's highlighting even more critical problems. When we create a model which embeds in itself the logic that goes behind solving these data problems, thanks to advances in FAT-ML, which is fairness, accountability, and transparency in machine learning, and explainable AI, we started poking at these models, right? Because yes and no were not good enough answers. And we wanted to know what is the reasoning behind the decision, right? Oftentimes revealing that actually the devil is in the data. Now we know that the way we have been solving these problems without ML, which is what we understand from that real world data, even that is far from ideal. Like the fact that loans have been given to individuals unfairly, that historical discrimination reflects in who has been getting access to opportunities. And this was long before models started showing these cues and biases to us. So we have to start with the harder problems. We have to ask, how do we make systems learn the right things, and who decides what is right or fair? How do we ensure that we are not amplifying the unfair kind of biases? So we need those policy answers before technical solutions are built, I would say. I was actually discussing this problem in a different forum and was asked this question by a high-ranked government official. They said, so you're trying to say that if a private bank has to take a revenue hit in their attempt to disburse fairer loans, that's okay? And my response was that I don't know, right? The key thing is that fairness and doing the right thing might come at a cost, and we need to explicitly acknowledge that, whether it's affirmative action or equal opportunity. We need to have that conversation now because this problem is not hidden anymore.
I'll go back now to where we began, and we need to touch on that. So, by collecting data from Facebook without user consent, Cambridge Analytica was basically able to identify micropopulations of voters, serve up customized ads, and encourage them to vote, basically. So, these similar data sets are still widely and legally available. Micro-targeting is commonplace. So then the question becomes, is this still possible, even if the effects might be muted? I don't know. What do you think?
So I think sci-fi panels related to US elections on Tuesday did touch upon some aspects of this. So we know that tech platforms are being more responsive in taking down misinformation. They are warning users. They are encouraging content consumers to double check sources. And I also feel that our data protection posture is a lot better. GDPR, being an excellent piece of regulation, has made it evident that companies will pay a price for not keeping user data safe and not being cognizant about how and why it is being used and shared. But lower probability of data leaks doesn't get us all the way there, unfortunately. There was more, as you pointed out, there was more that happened with the Cambridge Analytica scandal, right? I think there are looming vulnerabilities, and it's because of a different category of problems. Tech has changed the way in which we interact and consume content. We need to look at network related information diffusion phenomenon. What content does one get exposed to and its psychological impact? Because that is playing a significant role in how we are forming our opinions today. And these elements are extremely hard to quantify. We don't have great technical answers for many questions like how do we counter polarization and still be able to deploy recommendation algorithms for social network feeds? How do we balance content relevance and diversity with personalization? Right? If I'm being shown certain type of content based on my mood, my engagement with the platform, the time of the day, what my online friends are affording, and other aspects of my inferred identity, as you said. How do we gauge whether that inference is accurate and what's the price uh, of inaccurate assessment here? So as a data scientist, I feel that's where we still have a lot more work to do.
So before this conversation, we spoke with Jim Lewis, Megan Stiefel, Dipan Ghosh, Mishi Chaudhry, and the common thread there was that European privacy regulation is the gold standard. And Mishi, who spoke just before you, she's a lawyer, so she talked about how the legal system is really struggling with the sheer pace of technology. I think that question has to be put to a data scientist too. What are the cracks that you see from within, from your vantage point?
So policy and law often lags behind technology, right? For good or for bad, the bridge to gap the vagueness of phrases comprising regulations, ethical codes is not an easy one to build. Mostly due to lack of one-on-one, one-to-one mapping between tech primitives and policy facets. But I think there's a deeper problem here, which I alluded to earlier. But it's also the case that there are several layers to this phenomenon, to this divide we are talking about. First is that even for policy that exists out there, translating legal code to technical code is not trivial. Maybe let's take a few examples here. When we talk about right to be forgotten and every individual having the right that they can go to an organization and say, forget me, right? How does a technologist implement a solution like that? If I delete records and maintain logs for what I deleted, I now have meta information about this individual. So the system hasn't really forgotten them. If I don't store this information, how do I prove to them that all relevant data was actually deleted? So despite the regulation being fairly easy to understand, we cannot assume it's easy to implement. And before I talk about AI tech and policy divide, I actually want to spend a minute to highlight what makes AI applications different. There's an inherent deterministic nature to traditional programming. There are fixed set of outputs for a specific input in a programming application, right? So if I click on a button, I type a letter, I hover the mouse over some text, or just do a screen scroll, it would either take me to the next page, it would place my order, it would like log me in, or I could even get a network failure or some error, right? There's an explanation for almost everything, even if the explanation is that the behavior of the program is buggy. What makes machine learning different is that it's an attempt to make machines self-learn from a data corpus. We no longer fully control the output, right? Thanks to our attempt to make the machine intelligent. Despite having written the code to train the model in a deterministic programming language, a trained neural network can give you an output which may not be possible for you to determine ahead of time, which probably justifies the black box phrase often associated with complex predictive models. Now, when we say that with data science, this lag between AI tech and policy is significantly wider, let's consider the right to explanation as an example, meaning that I can go to the same organization and ask them why my application was declined for a job position. And let's say there's a machine learning aspect in how candidates are being reviewed and filtered by this organization. So a data scientist has to figure out the why behind the decision, which is not easy to do in and of itself if it's a complex model. Even if they do have answers for how or why a candidate was or their application was declined, it's not trivial to translate them for a non-technical person. Right? No one's going to be satisfied with a our model gives so and so weight to so and so attributes and gave us this decision with 84% confidence score. So that's it, and we are sorry. And let's not even get into the what's the path for recourse discussion. So believe me when I'm saying that I'm barely scratching the surface area of problems in this space. The second layer of the policy divide, I would say, goes back to the deeper questions of finding answers to what is right, ethical, justified sort of things I mentioned earlier. I think we need that even before we hand over the problem to a machine learning engineer.
So, code and norms, these two are basically rewiring the human social network. Take, just for instance, the people you may know algorithm. It nudges all of us to connect with a certain kind of people, and those who work behind those machines are constantly trying to close these triangles. They keep getting closed. And that leads to business outcomes, better margins, etc., whatever. So the question is not just how algorithmic curation works, which you've explained, but what decisions should be left to human judgment. And there, I want you to speak to predictability and the just the sheer importance of certain kinds of data which need to be left to human judgment.
I'm going to try a different take to this answer. It's a tough one for what it's worth. In one of the speak talks earlier this week, it was very beautifully highlighted how AI is replacing jobs only to create new ones. And it's evident that the new ones require higher cognitive skills, right? So leaving social media feeds aside for a second, content curation is not a new problem. It's age old. But now we need to be able to do that in a novel space where design elements intermingle differently. User interaction with technology is critical to consider from a psychological perspective. The ability to communicate details without overwhelming users who cannot and do not want to parse the underlying tech. So I think what we need to do is we need to get designers, privacy professionals, philosophers, computer science engineers in the same room such that they're not talking past each other. If that's not novel and exciting, I don't know what is. We talked about policy not having answers to tech questions in the form an engineer appreciates, and there are problems policy doesn't even have answers to yet. So technologists really need a different kind of training to tackle these concerns, and so do designers, ethicists, and psychologists. How many engineering programs in the world make it mandatory for engineers to learn ethics, ensure that they have an understanding of what it means to build technology that is a net positive addition to our social realities? I think we need to become thoughtful and reasonable in our approach to building software and machine learning models. And I'll probably end on this positive note that solution to these problems will entail us having to take a journey pursuing more creative and multidisciplinary endeavors.
I'm not letting you go now. um, what creeps you out as a data scientist working with large data sets? Mm, what freaks you out?
actually get freaked out more in my everyday interaction with technology rather than what happens to me at work or what I do at my work. Because all of a sudden, if I go to Amazon and if I want to, don't mean to call any particular tech giant out here, but if I go and I'm just like scrolling through the list and I am looking for something to buy and I see recommendations which I know is something I mentioned in an email to someone or like in a WhatsApp message, like this is always this missing piece, which is I do something somewhere which I think was completely isolated from my activity on this platform, and there are those links everywhere, right? And I definitely am one of those individuals who would go deep into privacy policies and see like what are the data sharing agreements, and they don't have answers to what I'm seeing in these algorithms, right? And it's also that I'm not not a technical person, and I would not be able to understand what is the deep technical magic at play here. It's what's happening is a little beyond that.
Megha Arora, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Nikhila. It was a pleasure.